think we'll get going on the 2020 Green Improvement Fund informational webinar. So first, we'll do a little bit of background on the reason for the Save the Rain program. As some of you may know, Syracuse, like many older cities in the country and around the world, has a combined sewer system, which means that the pipes are used to convey both sanitary and stormwater flow. And as depicted in this slide, that's not an issue in dry weather, when sanitary flow comprises most or all of the volume in the system and it has enough capacity. In these circumstances, 100% of the flow is conveyed to the wastewater treatment plant for treatment. On the next slide, however, you can see how during wet weather events, whether rainfall or snowmelt, or sometimes a combination of the two, the sewers may exceed their capacity to hold 100% of the flow. And in these instances, we see overflows at various outfall locations that have been designed to provide relief to the system in order to prevent backups. And these are called combined sewer overflows, or CSOs, and they're highly problematic since untreated sanitary waste is being released into the environment. In our case, into the tributaries of Onondaga Lake specifically. And it's exactly this phenomenon that led to a lawsuit in the 80s by Atlantic State's Legal Foundation against Onondaga County for a failure to comply with the Clean Water Act regulations. Initially guided by a federal consent order that resulted from that lawsuit, and later an amended consent judgment, or the ACJ, that dictated the county's cleanup responsibilities, the management program eventually evolved into the Save the Rain program, with which you're all familiar. The approaches of which were spelled out in the fourth stipulation of the ACJ, which occurred in 2009. And so right now we have an ongoing transition from the ACJ agreement to what's called a long-term control plan. And while this won't affect the measures the county takes to reduce overflows, it changes the nature of the agreement itself and results in a more direct relationship between the county and the New York State DEC. So you might wonder if all this work has been successful. And I think we can answer that with an enthusiastic yes. So over the past few decades, we've seen the lake blossom as a community asset. Species diversity has increased significantly in the lake, and we've seen the entire ecosystem benefit as a result. So hopefully many are familiar with the eagles nesting on the shores of Onondaga Lake, which I'm fortunate enough to see regularly here at the Metro plant. It's really inspiring, and I think it's great proof of the lake's transformation. Now, the change in water quality that has driven this transformation can be seen in concrete terms in these next slides. Now, the first slide shows the county's success at increasing CSO capture, going from less than 80% at the time of the initial lawsuit to the ACJ requirement of 95% in 2014, several years ahead of schedule, to the current level of almost 98% and going. And the next couple of slides show a corresponding downward trend in harmful bacteria levels in the lake's tributaries, showing a strong correlation between the county's efforts and the achievement of the objectives of the ACJ. And overall, it's a success story. It's a huge success story. So I think now we can shift to the reason for our meeting here today, which is the county's Green Improvement Fund, or GIF, as we'll refer to it going forward. In many areas of the city, the county's access to impermeable spaces is limited by property rights. Opportunities for capture in public spaces were depleted pretty early on. Since most of the land is held by private owners, the participation of people and organizations like those represented here today was absolutely critical to achieving our objectives. So in light of this fact, we realized that we needed to come up with a creative approach to green infrastructure, or GI, installation in these areas. And our solution was to develop a system by which we could offer funds to assist private property owners in their property enhancement and maintenance efforts. And this comes in the form of a reimbursement for inclusion of GI technologies in their projects. It's become a really critical tool for us over the years. You can see here how the funding breaks down according to the priority assignments we've made with the assistance of Jacobs, the program managers for Save the Rain. In the next slide, you'll see some of the technologies that we've relied on for stormwater capture on both public and private property. And which of these we end up using will be dictated by the goals of the project at hand. So at this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Zach from Jacobs to discuss the particulars of the program, especially as it relates to the 2020 GIF priority map. Take it away, Zach.
Thanks, Jed. Just a quickly intro on me, Zach Monge. I am the county's program manager for the CSO Combined Sewer Overflow Program. I work for Jacobs Engineering here in Syracuse. Also, if anybody has any questions, you can note the slide number on the bottom right, and you can post a question in the chat box here, or you can just save the questions at the end. We'll open it up for Q&As at the end, but please do that if you have anything. So the 2020 GIF program, Jed went over the funding levels, high, medium, and low priority, and no funding areas. This is our map here, and I'll go through each of these areas zoomed in a little closer. But you can see a lot of the areas have been grayed out because we made a lot of progress over the years. But there are a few areas we still need some work to do, and that's the yellow, green, and the one red area on the map here as well. To kind of zoom in on these areas a little closer, I'll start with CSO 7. 007, which is a medium priority area, so funded at 20 cents per gallon of stormwater captured. We have a budget of $200,000 maximum award per project and an aggregate budget of $400,000 for this particular CSO area. It's a small CSO area, but it's still an active area that we need to address our combined sewer overflows from. Pretty much North Gaddis Street from Erie Boulevard to Park Ave. And the offshoots of those, Richmond Ave, Wilkinson Street. So not a very large area at all, as I mentioned, but there are some commercial properties in here which would lend to good green improvement fund projects, particularly those parking lots that you kind of see underneath the yellow area there. Next area is CSO 039. This is also a medium priority area, so again, 20 cents per gallon funding of stormwater capture. It's $200,000 maximum award per applicant, and it is subject to an aggregate budget limit of $1.5 million. So this kind of cuts 81, splits it right down the middle. So each side of 81, Interstate 81, you got the SU and ESF campus, the Carrier Dome, and the cemetery, which is pretty much not a lot of opportunity there in terms of green improvement fund. But the west side of I-81, Salina Street, State Street, there's a lot of opportunity in that side of the area, a lot of large parking lots, a lot of commercial property, which will really serve well for the green improvement fund and stormwater capture. Next CSO is CSO 027, and this is our highest priority CSO. There are no projects or aggregate funding limits. The county has done a lot of greening and green projects and CSO abatement projects in this area historically. We've kind of tapped out everything that the county can do in this area in terms of the public side. So we really need projects on the private side and the GIF program in this area, which is why it's high priority. And a main focus of this program is to try to develop some projects in this area. So it's roughly down Washington, Water, and Fayette Streets, separating from basically Onondaga Creek eastward toward Erie Boulevard to the far east end of the area. I-81 separates down the middle, but it's purely in pretty much the heart of downtown of the city and a little bit outside. But like I said, this is a high priority area for us, one that we really are looking for projects. So if you have a property in this area, feel free to reach out to us and we can help work with you to develop an application and potentially submit on a project here. Next CSO is a group of CSOs, as they're all kind of right next to each other, is our CSOs 020, 021, and 080A. These are all medium priority CSOs. Again, no projects or aggregate funding limits for these CSOs. They're all kind of connected. There's different CSO areas, but they're all kind of connected, which is why they're all here on one map. And this area is pretty much north of 690 and east of I-81. A lot of residential area here, which doesn't really apply for the GIF program. But there's a lot of commercial property on James Street, Salina Street, State Street, Lodi Street. So there's a lot of commercial property and a lot of opportunity for green improvement fund projects in these particular CSOs. And the next is CSO 073A, which is to the east of that batch we just looked at, 2021 and 080A. This is a low priority CSO. It is an area we do need to do some CSO abatement. It's primarily a residential area, so there's not a lot of opportunity in terms of GIF, but there are some commercial properties here which would be very applicable to the GIF program. I mentioned low priority, so this would be funded at 10 cents per gallon of runoff capture from the property, and a budget limit of $250,000 in total for the CSO, no project limits in specific. So that's our funding areas and funding limits. I'm going to get into a little technical aspects of this a bit now. So the requirements for green infrastructure design. The elements must capture between 0.5 inches to 2 inches of runoff from the tributary impervious areas. What I like to call a sweet spot is the 1 inch capture volume. And that is very comparable to the New York State DEC requirements for water quality volume. So that tends to be where you get your most bang for your buck, so to speak. There is a minimal volume to be eligible. 100,000 gallons of area, or whatever volume rather, should be captured. Anything less than that would not be eligible for the program, but anything above that, by all means, is eligible. So smaller, really small parcels really don't really apply, but most parcels in the city do apply for this program. We do prefer to have permit-ready project submissions that are submitted to the county. That means that the city or other entities, as appropriate, have reviewed and permitted the project. It gets kind of challenging when the projects have to be resubmitted over and over again with design changes and whatnot. And there is a fee for every time there's a resubmission, $250 for the first fee and $100 thereafter. That fee is deducted from your award, so it's not something you have to pay the county. It's just money that's taken away from your award amount ultimately. So we do prefer those projects to be permit ready and sort of almost shovel ready as they are submitted. But that doesn't mean you can't submit earlier conceptual design projects, but there is that fee, as I mentioned. The calculator. So the calculator is what's used to determine the funding. It's an Excel-based file, Microsoft Excel that is, and there are instructions for use on the first tab. At the end here, as we get through the slides, we're going to pop open the calculator in the Excel file and kind of do a dummy project here just to show how it works. But it is what we use to calculate funding by entering the green infrastructure types, technologies, areas, and whatnot, and it does spit out a funding amount. So we'll show that here in a little bit. Okay, so you've done a project now. How does the reimbursement work? Funds are reimbursed after the completion of the project. So this is a reimbursement program. That money is not received up front. The reimbursement process requires the applicant to submit a reimbursement package substantiating their costs. So if your grant award is for $100,000 and you only end up spending $85,000, you only get the $85,000. You already spend what you spent. But if on the contrary to that, your grant award was $100,000 and you spent $120,000, you still only get the maximum grant award, which is $100,000. The program is not meant to make you 100% whole in terms of, your grant's $100,000, you get $100,000. Typically, it's about 60 to 70% of the cost is funded by the grant, depending on the type of project, but that's the typical range we see. Eligible items for reimbursement include construction, engineering, and field testing. And field testing, we mean infiltration testing, for example, and there's a cap of $2,000 maximum for field testing reimbursement. Payment is usually turned around by the county relatively quickly in 1 to 2 months after submission of the complete reimbursement package. And I emphasize complete there because if it's not complete, things are missing, costs aren't substantiated, et cetera, it will delay the process of being reimbursed. Maintenance, long-term. So the contract that is executed with the county for these Green Improvement Fund projects does include a maintenance clause. And the City of Syracuse, all these areas are within the city. The city requires maintenance in perpetuity of the stormwater elements and green infrastructure elements that are installed. The county will routinely inspect at least once a year green infrastructure installed and funded by the Green Improvement Fund program. If it's found that the GI is neglected and not being maintained to the point where it's not functioning as desired or as designed rather, the county will notify the applicant of those deficiencies and we will discuss options for getting a remedy and returning the functionality. We've seen overall, we see really good compliance with maintenance. Over 98% of our projects are being very compliant with maintenance. So we don't really have a concern with it, but it is an item up front that we need to make clear that long-term maintenance of the green infrastructure is very important, not just for the CSO program, but also for the property owner themselves. So the application is online on the Save the Rain website. The link is right here on the slides, and we can show you these afterwards. Applications must be submitted in complete form. Make sure all the pages that require initialing and signature are signed, and they're sent to the county, both paper and electronic versions, to Jed at the address on the left-hand side. My contact information is on the right-hand side. The website is, as I mentioned, savetherrain.us, and up on top there's a little drop down for funding, and Green Improvement Fund is found there, or you can go directly from this link on this slide here. The application is fairly straightforward to walk through. We're not going to walk through it now, but it is pretty straightforward to understand and complete. We do recommend a licensed design professional help complete the technical portions of the application, because there are some technical design elements that need to be provided as well, such as the design conceptual plan, drainage area plan, preliminary GIF calculator, and a few other things that needs to be completed by a licensed design professional. And with that, I'm going to transition here to the Excel file to show the calculator. Okay. So here's the calculator. The first tab, so there's three tabs at the bottom. Really, the first two tabs, only the two tabs you'll ever need. The third tab is just lookups for the calculator itself. So the instructions tab, and I'm not going to read all these in detail, but the instructions tab, it gives you just what it says, instructions to complete the application. It's very, we at least think it's very clear and succinct in what's required to complete the calculator and submit it to the county. Second tab is the actual calculator. I'll go through how this kind of works. Any of the green shaded areas are where user inputs are required. So when you're completing your application, your calculator, these areas need to be updated or entered by the applicant or design professional. Right up on top, it starts with project name, the CSO area. So this is a drop down here. Depending on where your CSO is or your project is located, what CSO basin, you click that drop down. Here we go. And it gives you all the options for all the areas that are fundable. And based on that, say I'll click CSO 27 in this case, the priority level populates based on that, the low, medium, or high priorities. And then further down here, column 1 is the proposed green technology. So in this case, I put in some dummy variables here, but trees and porous pavement. That is where you would select what type of green infrastructure you're installing in the project. Column 2 and column 3 are automatically populated based on what green technology is selected. So the typical unit cost and unit for that type of green infrastructure. Column 4 will be completed by the applicant or designer. In this case, for the tree rows, the proposed quantity of trees would be, in this case, is 5. And then column 5 is the impervious area managed by that green infrastructure. In this case, I had some dummy numbers of 5,000 for the tree and 10,000 for the porous pavement. Column 6 is an automatically calculated cell for the runoff volume that's achieved with that area of green infrastructure and impervious drainage area that's managed. Column 7 is your capture volume, as I mentioned. It's between those two values, 0.125 and 2 inches. I have 1 inch set here because that's the quote-unquote sweet spot. And then columns 8 and beyond are all automatically calculated cells, which help in determining the funding amount. Now, on a project-by-project basis, there may be some additional itemized work that's not typical, so to speak, to green infrastructure. A common one is overflow connections. The city does require, for most larger projects, an overflow connection to a city sewer or something to that effect. Now, if there are additional costs, that goes here in step 5. I'm going to quickly type in here overflow connection and put a number of 5,000 just for an easy number. So additional costs that are approved by the county that are above and beyond typical green infrastructure costs. And a good example, as I said, is overflow connections, roof gutters are sometimes one. There's a few others that we see commonly. Those types of costs will go in this step 5 box here. All right, scrolling down a little bit and to the right. Step 6 is where the funding amount is ultimately determined. So the requested funding goes in those green highlighted cells. I'll type in some dummy numbers here just to get something filled out. And then the maximum funding allowed is calculated by the calculator, the yellow highlighted cells. So for these numbers I entered here, these dummy numbers that I entered, the green infrastructure construction cost that would be funded by the grant is $60,000. The engineering cost is $7,200, and the field testing cost is $2,000. And as with the reimbursement, it takes the lesser of the two amounts. If your construction, if you requested, say, $50,000 for construction instead of the 70, the number drops, the funding drops to 50,000 as a result, because it takes the lesser of the two, the requested versus the maximum calculated based on this calculator. And then you add all that up, and then this pink bar here is the funding. So for the numbers that I've entered in this version of the calculator, the project will receive $59,200 in funding. I know I went through that really quickly for the purposes of this webinar, but it's kind of a self-explanatory process for the instructions tab, and the instructions tab itself will lay it out for you. And with that, I am going to migrate back to the PowerPoint here. Jen, is there anything you want to add before I stop the recording and we open this up for Q&A?
I don't think so. Just to call attention to that last name on the contact list, and that was Adam Woodburn. He runs he's the program manager for stormwater in the county. So he's a resource too, but I'll always be the go-to on the GIF.